Good to be here. Good to see some familiar faces. First of all, I just want to start by saying anytime you're asked to return to a place that you helped build, you have.
Did the Indiana Fever just execute the most cold-blooded, strategically precise power move in the entire history of professional basketball? Or are they stumbling headfirst into a colossal, catastrophic train wreck that will spiral completely beyond their ability to contain? When a once-in-a-lifetime talent graces the hardwood floor, the entire sports universe locks in on every single breath she takes. And for the Indiana Fever, that already blinding spotlight instantly transformed into a scorching, unforgiving laser beam that ruthlessly exposed every hidden crack, festering wound, and organizational failure buried deep within their structure. The conclusion of this past season wasn't simply a heartbreaking end to what seemed like a promising chapter. It was a full-scale, total organizational meltdown that left devoted fans completely devastated and sent the front office spiraling into a frantic, full-blown state of emergency panic. Caitlin was visibly worn down, physically beaten, and emotionally hollowed out after an absolutely punishing rookie season where she endured an unparalleled level of physical targeting, suffocating defensive attention, and a deeply disturbing absence of meaningful protection from her own teammates and coaching staff. The playoff series against the Connecticut Sun was supposed to represent a triumphant, electric coming-out party for the Fever's undeniably exciting future. But instead, it grotesquely transformed into a savage, gut-wrenching reality check broadcast in high definition across national television screens everywhere. The team appeared thoroughly unprepared, completely fragmented, and utterly overwhelmed by the sheer weight and magnitude of the postseason moment, ultimately getting unceremoniously swept out of contention without mounting even a remotely credible resistance. You could physically feel the bone-deep exhaustion radiating from the players' hollow eyes and the jaw-dropping, inexcusable absence of meaningful adjustments from the coaching staff on the sidelines, which made it devastatingly and undeniably clear that something deeply fundamental needed to be completely dismantled and rebuilt from the ground up immediately. The coaching staff stood frozen, visibly paralyzed, incapable of shielding their prized franchise cornerstone or engineering any kind of tactical escape from the suffocating, airtight defensive stranglehold their opponents had locked them inside. This wasn't merely a painful playoff elimination. It was a catastrophic, public disintegration of organizational trust on the grandest possible stage imaginable. And the brutal, far-reaching consequences of that humiliating post-season exit were only just beginning to violently unfold. Behind firmly closed doors, the searing shame of that playoff implosion immediately ignited an aggressive, coldly calculated, and thoroughly merciless chain reaction at the absolute highest levels of the franchise's power structure. Enter Kelly Krauskopf, the legendary mastermind behind the Fever's iconic 2012 championship dynasty, who was suddenly and dramatically summoned back as president of basketball operations to aggressively untangle this monumental, deeply embarrassing organizational disaster. She didn't walk back through those doors to exchange pleasantries, rebuild burned bridges, or generously distribute unearned second chances to underperforming personnel. She was brought in directly by ownership to carry out a sweeping, uncompromising, music, and surgically ruthless demolition of a broken, antiquated organizational system. The inevitable fate of head coach Christy Sides became crystal clear almost instantaneously. The front office came to a rapid, sobering realization that they simply could not afford to squander even a single precious moment of their generational superstar's critical developmental window under a leader who had demonstrably failed to earn the unconditional respect of her locker room. Krauskopf took one penetrating, unflinching look at the dysfunctional practice environment, the maddening inability to execute when games were on the line, and the deeply poisoned relationships fracturing the core of the roster, and immediately understood that a seismic, uncompromising cultural transformation was the only remaining path forward. Dismissing Sides wasn't simply about assigning blame for the playoff catastrophe. It was a deliberately sharp, organizationally defining message transmitted loudly and clearly to every single person inside the building that complacency, dysfunction, and spineless leadership would be permanently and absolutely eradicated going forward without hesitation. The incoming president recognized with striking clarity that the franchise desperately lacked a unified identity, a physical and mental toughness, and a sophisticated modern framework capable of fully unlocking the breathtaking potential of the most valuable and intensely scrutinized athlete in the entire sports world today. Speculation immediately erupted and spread at a furious, uncontrollable pace about who on earth could possibly accept this suffocating pressure cooker of a position and realistically withstand the relentless, crushing weight of daily media examination without completely falling apart. The front office urgently required someone carrying legitimate championship credentials, someone who could walk into a veteran locker room and command immediate, ironclad authority, and above all else, someone who didn't flinch or waver at the sight of the enormous, glowing bullseye fastened permanently to their back. But the precise individual they had already quietly identified as their top target was simultaneously entangled in an explosive and deeply scrutinized controversy of her very own, unfolding dramatically on the complete opposite end of the league. While the Fever were furiously dismantling and restructuring their entire coaching infrastructure, a profoundly suspicious and intensely watched situation was simultaneously developing over in Connecticut surrounding their celebrated head coach, Stephanie White. White had just brilliantly engineered the precise defensive masterpiece that systematically dismantled and publicly humiliated Indiana throughout the playoffs, exposing them mercilessly before a massive national television audience. Yet, shockingly, within just a handful of weeks following that commanding and dominant playoff series victory, loud and persistent whispers began rippling urgently through well-connected league circles that she was suddenly and abruptly separating from the Sun, despite commanding a battle-tested, veteran-laden roster assembled specifically and perfectly to pursue a championship title immediately. The suspicious timing of this unexpected departure raised enormous red flags, sparking widespread and intense speculation that clandestine back-channel negotiations had been quietly and carefully unfolding entirely beneath the public surface for a considerable stretch of time. Deeply connected league insiders suggested White harbored growing, deep-seated frustrations with Connecticut's organizational ceiling and inadequate infrastructure, while equally credible voices pointed toward an undeniable, magnetic gravitational pull drawing her back to Indiana, the very place where she had previously flourished as both a player and a coach. The very notion that a demonstrably elite, highly accomplished coach would deliberately abandon a legitimate championship-contending organization mere days after engineering a dominant deep playoff run set off deafening alarm bells across the entire professional basketball landscape, with serious and pointed accusations of tampering and secretive shadow dealing rapidly gaining significant traction. Fans, analysts, and rival front office executives found it impossible to ignore the blindingly obvious connections forming before their eyes, recognizing that Krauskopf and White shared an ironclad, deeply rooted pre-existing bond forged and hardened during their most triumphant years building the Fever into an elite, dominant organization together. The public conversation shifted rapidly and dramatically from a routine, unremarkable coaching search into what increasingly appeared to be a meticulously orchestrated, brilliantly engineered hostile takeover scheme that had been quietly and carefully assembled long before the Fever's turbulent, chaotic season had even officially drawn to its painful close. If these explosive, persistent rumors carry even a shred of legitimate truth, it means the Fever's coldly calculating front office was actively and deliberately engineering this aggressive regime change while their outgoing coach was still desperately diagramming plays on the sideline in complete ignorance. But successfully luring a high-profile, fiercely coveted coaching talent away from a bitter, hated rival organization was realistically only half of the enormous, daunting battle ahead. The real stomach-churning nightmare was already crouching silently and patiently inside the walls of her soon-to-be locker room. What the broader general public and the millions of enthusiastic new supporters never fully witnessed during the Fever's massively televised season was a locker room atmosphere that was dangerously, consistently teetering on the razor-sharp edge of erupting into total, unmanageable dysfunction. Across the entirety of that turbulent year, there were constant, impossible-to-ignore whispers of deeply embedded friction, slowly simmering veteran resentment, and a glaring, undeniable chemistry vacuum that the previous coaching staff completely lacked the authority, credibility, or interpersonal skill to genuinely address or repair. Players were openly and visibly seething over wildly inconsistent rotational roles. Critical defensive assignments were habitually broken down due to a stunning, chronic absence of on-court communication and trust, and the visibly defeated body language radiating from the bench painted a profoundly discouraging portrait of a roster fractured deeply into isolated, competing factions. Nalissa Smith, a former highly touted lottery selection carrying enormous untapped potential, began flooding her social media presence with conspicuously cryptic, thinly veiled passive-aggressive commentary, deliberately liking posts that blatantly telegraphed her boiling frustration with her diminished role and the franchise's deeply confusing overall direction. The outgoing coaching staff had comprehensively and irreversibly forfeited the locker room's genuine respect long before the postseason even arrived, producing a profoundly toxic internal atmosphere where mutual trust had essentially evaporated entirely, and every minor misstep was grotesquely amplified under the hot, merciless glare of constant media scrutiny. Established, experienced veterans privately simmered with feelings of being deliberately marginalized and openly disrespected by the overwhelming, unprecedented wave of attention continuously lavished upon the incoming rookie class, generating an unbearably tense and awkward internal dynamic where the team's most electrifying young player was unjustly burdened with navigating a minefield of deeply wounded, fragile egos entirely without meaningful guidance from the organizational leadership surrounding her. Heavily circulated and persistently repeated unconfirmed reports even suggested that at one particularly explosive, white-knuckle flashpoint during a punishing early-season losing stretch, pivotal locker room figures convened a locked door, players-only emergency meeting that deliberately and pointedly excluded the entire coaching staff, music, specifically to allow grievances to pour out freely and honestly without the suffocating fear of organizational consequences or retaliation. This profoundly shattered, dangerously unstable internal dynamic is precisely and unambiguously why the newly empowered front office moved with such breathtaking, almost shocking decisiveness to rip out the previous regime by its roots, fully understanding that allowing this corrosive, poisonous energy to fester untouched through another long off-season would irreparably destroy their rapidly narrowing championship window before it ever truly opened. The incoming head coach wouldn't simply be choreographing offensive sets and managing strategic timeouts in pressure situations. She would be parachuting directly into an active role as a full-time organizational crisis manager for a deeply emotional, psychologically fragile squad perpetually hovering on the trembling edge of a catastrophic internal implosion. And that reality leads us directly and unavoidably to the genuinely stunning, completely non-negotiable mandate that the newly restructured front office has explicitly and publicly delivered to their incoming, handsomely compensated leadership team. Kelly Krauskopf isn't casually tossing over the keys to the franchise with a warm smile and a cheerful wish for good luck. She is conveying a brutally stern, aggressively worded, and thoroughly non-negotiable directive about precisely what is demanded, expected, and required beginning from the very first day. Music. The crushing, unrelenting mandate dropped squarely and heavily onto Stephanie White's shoulders is reportedly blunt, terrifying in its scope, and completely absolute in its finality. Reverse the playoff collapse entirely. Physically shield and protect the franchise cornerstone at absolutely any and all costs. And impose total unquestioned dominance across every inch of this league, or this entire, massively publicized, high-stakes experiment will detonate violently in everyone's faces. Music. In the most catastrophically historic fashion imaginable. This is emphatically, unambiguously not a patient rebuilding project. There is absolutely zero tolerance for a leisurely, gradual transitional process, and there exists not even the faintest sliver of a grace period for a newly complicated system to gently and organically take hold. The ironclad organizational expectation flowing directly downward from ownership is nothing short of a deep, fiercely competitive, genuinely meaningful playoff run delivered immediately and without excuses from the opening tip. Krauskopf understands intimately and personally that the modern professional game has evolved into something significantly more physically punishing, relentlessly faster, music, and brutally unforgiving than at any previous point in the sport's history. And she expects her incoming coaching staff to fearlessly install an old-school enforcer's mentality that categorically and forcefully prevents opposing organizations from bullying, physically targeting, or psychologically intimidating their irreplaceable star player ever again. The message emanating loudly and unmistakably from the president's office is transparent and unambiguous that the passive, bewildering, frustratingly soft rotational decisions defining the previous era are completely, permanently extinct. And every single roster member who isn't fully, enthusiastically, and unconditionally locked in to the incoming hyper-aggressive winning culture will be swiftly, decisively, and permanently relocated to another organization without sentiment or hesitation. White is being explicitly assigned an almost impossibly complex, extraordinarily delicate high-wire balancing act, carefully and skillfully soothing the deeply wounded, badly bruised egos of disgruntled, unhappy veteran contributors while simultaneously guaranteeing that every single element of the offensive infrastructure flows naturally, powerfully, and seamlessly through their transcendent, record-shattering point guard without compromise. The front office has communicated with unmistakable clarity that they will generously open the organizational checkbook and make available whatever premium resources, elite support staff, or state-of-the-art facilities are deemed necessary to capture a championship. But in firm, unwavering return, They are demanding absolute, zero-exception accountability and a locker room sealed together in complete, unbreakable solidarity against the entire rest of the league. Should the team emerge from the starting gate of the eagerly anticipated upcoming season looking lethargic, organizationally scattered, or physically cowed by the aggression of their opponents in any capacity, the avalanche of criticism and blame will descend with brutal immediacy upon the coaching staff for catastrophically failing to actualize the president's sweeping, ruthlessly ambitious organizational vision. But the immense, soul-crushing pressure radiating relentlessly outward from the front office represents only a small, almost negligible fraction of the total accumulated stress bearing down on this franchise, because the actual playing roster itself is a literal, primed, and ticking explosive device just waiting to detonate with devastating force at the single most inconvenient, most damaging moment conceivable. As though the swirling, consuming coaching drama and the jarring high-profile front office power seizure weren't already collectively and completely suffocating enough, the Indiana Fever are staring with wide, terrified eyes directly down the barrel of a wildly volatile, extraordinarily perilous off-season capable of fundamentally and permanently redirecting the entire trajectory of their franchise for the next full decade and beyond. Kelsey Mitchell, the team's unquestionably most dependable and consistent veteran scoring weapon, the beating heart fueling their devastating transition offense, and an absolutely irreplaceable and critically load-bearing component of their entire competitive infrastructure, is officially stepping into unrestricted free agency. And losing her services to a hungry rival organization would represent an absolutely catastrophic, potentially unrecoverable, franchise-altering devastation. Mitchell has weathered years of demoralizing losing seasons, relentless and exhausting organizational chaos, and the profoundly devastating, soul-crushing personal tragedy of losing her father during the middle of an active season, which means she owes this franchise absolutely nothing whatsoever if she ultimately decides deep in her heart that she desperately craves and deserves a completely clean, liberating fresh start somewhere far quieter and less chaotic. If Mitchell concludes that the suffocating, never-ending whirlwind of drama perpetually swirling around professional basketball in Indiana simply isn't worth the crushing daily psychological toll and elects to ink a lucrative, substantial contract with a rival organization, the entire offensive responsibility and scoring burden crashes back down with full, unforgiving weight squarely onto the still-developing shoulders of a second-year player, completely and devastatingly unraveling every carefully constructed thread of the team's painstakingly assembled blueprint for sustained competitive success. Furthermore, the front office is simultaneously confronted with the enormously complicated and politically delicate challenge of determining precisely what course of action to take regarding visibly disgruntled roster members who have transparently and loudly signaled their desire to escape the relentless, suffocating spotlight, meaning leadership must masterfully and carefully navigate extraordinarily high-stakes, multi-layered trade negotiations without surrendering critical organizational leverage to rival general managers who are acutely and opportunistically aware of exactly how desperate and exposed the Fever's position truly is. Pouring massive accelerating fuel onto this already ferociously raging organizational inferno, the incoming collective bargaining agreement is hovering ominously and threateningly over the entire league like a thickening, foreboding storm cloud, signaling unmistakably that player salaries across the board are preparing to absolutely and dramatically skyrocket. And the already narrow, rapidly closing window of opportunity to strategically assemble a legitimate, competitive super team while operating within the tight constraints of a restricted budget is slamming shut with terrifying and unforgiving speed. The Fever currently find themselves positioned directly at the scorching, white-hot epicenter of a massive, historically unprecedented financial revolution sweeping through the entire landscape of women's professional sports, generating staggering, jaw-dropping revenue figures that have shattered every previously established record, which means ownership is now forcefully and uncompromisingly demanding a polished, elite product delivered consistently on the floor that authentically and perfectly mirrors the extraordinary, unprecedented cultural hype surrounding the franchise. They simply and absolutely cannot afford to present themselves as a disorganized, stumbling, lottery-level operation while simultaneously performing in front of thunderously sold-out, electricity-charged arenas and shattering national television viewership records on every single night they lace up their sneakers and step beneath those bright arena lights. Every individual roster decision, every carefully evaluated draft selection, every tense and high-pressure contract negotiation, and every swirling trade rumor dominating this off-season carries the immense, suffocating gravitational weight of the franchise's entire long-term financial viability and organizational legacy, and even a single poorly calculated, Ill-timed misstep could instantly and violently send them careening right back down into the dark, humiliating depths of the league's basement standings. But the single most ferocious, most pitiless, and most emotionally punishing battle this organization will ultimately be forced to confront won't be quietly brokered inside a carpeted corporate boardroom or fiercely contested on the sweat-soaked practice court floor. It will be waged relentlessly, brutally, and without mercy every single day inside the savage, unpredictable, and utterly unforgiving court of public opinion. The sheer, staggering volume of suffocating media attention, viral social media surveillance, music, and fanatically passionate fan obsession encircling this particular franchise has escalated to a genuinely terrifying, historically unprecedented level that the sport of professional basketball has categorically never witnessed or experienced at any single point throughout its entire storied existence. Tens of millions of enthusiastic, extraordinarily vocal brand-new fans have come pouring in overwhelming waves into the broader basketball ecosystem, arriving with them carrying fierce, immovable opinions, endlessly passionate and heated debates, and a dangerously, notoriously short collective fuse for any perceivable form of organizational failure or interpreted disrespect directed toward their beloved, idolized players. When the Fever were absorbing painful, demoralizing early-season defeats during the previous campaign, the massive, furious public backlash wasn't politely or neatly contained to the forgotten back pages of regional local newspapers. It erupted instantaneously into a ferociously aggressive, relentlessly daily, globally trending conversation dominating every major social media platform simultaneously, manufacturing a suffocating, psychologically exhausting digital firestorm that players found themselves completely and utterly powerless to escape regardless of where they turned. This deafening, relentless external bombardment of noise inevitably and forcefully penetrates even the most carefully fortified locker room walls, profoundly and measurably corroding the mental wellness, laser-sharp focus, and hard-won confidence of the players from the inside out, ultimately strong-arming the front office into making hasty, impulsive, sometimes devastatingly short-sighted reactive decisions purely and desperately to temporarily pacify and silence the roaring, insatiable tidal wave of public outrage. The passionate new generation of fans are ferociously, almost frighteningly protective of their beloved new franchise point guard, and any fleeting perception that she is being unfairly constrained by incompetent, outdated coaching philosophies, or deliberately overlooked by resentful, self-serving teammates, immediately detonates into a massive, completely uncontrollable digital wildfire that consumes and dominates the entire sports news cycle voraciously for days on end without mercy. This volcanic hair-trigger, completely unforgiving media environment is the precise, unvarnished reality that Stephanie White is voluntarily, and perhaps astonishingly, walking headfirst and wide-eyed directly into, a terrifying new professional existence where even a routine, unremarkable back-to-back losing stretch will instantaneously ignite angry, prime-time national television panel discussions furiously debating her immediate job security and loudly demanding her removal from the sideline. Krauskopf fully and intimately understands that the franchise's carefully cultivated public brand image is presently navigating an almost impossibly thin, breathtakingly precarious tightrope. Music, delicately suspended between being universally celebrated as a transformative, generationally significant sporting success story, music, and being broadly and mockingly dismissed as a tragic, deeply embarrassing cautionary tale of catastrophically squandered, once-in-a-lifetime, generational talent and opportunity. They are fighting with every available resource, every ounce of organizational will, and every strategic tool at their disposal each and every single day to demonstrate convincingly to the entire watching sports world that they represent a serious, legitimate, genuinely championship-caliber franchise and absolutely, definitively not merely a wildly profitable, elaborately packaged traveling novelty spectacle cynically capitalizing on one singular player's breathtaking, world-altering global celebrity status. And as the final, fiercely contested and critically important pieces of this sprawling, impossibly high-stakes strategic chessboard begin at long last to settle conclusively into their designated positions, music, the ultimate, defining stakes attached to this enormously anticipated upcoming season have crystallized into something terrifyingly and undeniably transparent to every single soul with a meaningful stake in the outcome. The final, resolute, and uncompromising message has been delivered with absolute finality from the very highest organizational level.